Hello, I'm Jerry Wasserman, actually Jerome, but we'll call myself Jerry, and you can call me Jerry too. Uh, Lived in Omaha, Nebraska since 1936, part of the Jewish community since then. But let me explain where it all came from originally. My grandparents on both sides lived in Russia. And for one reason or another, the political structure of Russia, the czars, the pogroms, uh, the military type of situation that was in Russia led a lot of Jews to leave there, and my grandparents were along with them. My father's parents came to this country approximately in 1899 or 1898 approximately. They had only a couple of children. I think my dad was the first one born in this country, and eventually they had 14 children, 7 boys and 7 girls, that were living, and I believe there was one that miscarried. How my grandmother, who I never knew, and I never knew my grandfather on my dad's side of the family, because they had passed away before I was even born, could survive all those children. I know not how, but they matriculated to Wisconsin and lived in the Wisconsin, Minnesota, and upper Iowa areas. Excuse me. And on my mother's side, they came from Minsk, which was oftentimes argued over whether it was Poland or Russia. And where I remember my grandfather, because he was the only one that was alive when I was a youngster, and he passed away when I was approximately 4 years old here in Omaha. They came to this country. My uncle and my grandfather left Russia through Vladivostok and came to the west coast of the United States and wound up in Sioux City, Iowa, where they had relatives. My mother and my grandmother went the other way through Europe and came in through New York. So putting it all together, exact dates and everything, I can't do that. But they met in Sioux City and established themselves there. My grandfather was in a bakery and worked in Sioux City and homesteaded in South Dakota to get some free land, as they did in those days. My other grandfather was in the grocery business, owned a theater, did several things. Those people, something looked a little bit better because they really had nothing as a basis to operate with when they got here. They only had themselves and their families and the ability to work hard to try and make a life for themselves. But they operated a theater in Minneapolis and then a general store in northern Iowa, and where my father and mother met was my uncle, Dave Roden, met my aunt, Idell, who was a Wasserman, and got married and lived in Sioux City. At that time, my dad was in the military during World War I. And when he came back, actually he served another hitch in the military after World War I in Schofield Barracks in Hawaii. And after he got out of the Army, it was sort of a arranged situation. They said, well, why don't we fix up your brother with my sister type of thing. And my mother and father met in Sioux City and got married. And my dad had saved a little bit of money when he was in the military. And my mother was working, although she came to this country as a 12-year-old, she was working in Sioux City for an auto agency as a bookkeeper. My mom was a fast learner. She learned English well, but I always chuckle a little bit because she used to spell some of her English words phonetically. She spelled it how it sounded. And she's not the only one. A lot of refugee people did that as they learned English. But she was a bookkeeper, and when they got married, they moved to Coon Rapids, Iowa. And they bought a little general store there. And of course, being probably the only Jews in Coon Rapids, were not readily welcomed by the Gentile population of Coon Rapids. One family of Jews, probably in the thought of some people, was too many. After they got to know my folks became successful in Coon Rapids, Iowa. Their store was viable, and they developed a good rapport with the farmers and the people that lived around there, and did a nice business. And then they were talking to one of the purveyors from Sioux City, a gentleman that called on him, and he told them about a store in Blunt, South Dakota. It was a bigger sized store, and it was a pretty good store, and maybe my dad would be interested. So he hopped in the car of the day, whatever it might have been, and drove to Blunt, South Dakota, and looked over the situation there, and decided that would be a good store. It was bigger, and it covered more territory, and Blunt was about 20 miles from the state capital of Pierre, along the area of the Missouri River, and they decided that they would move there. In the meantime, my brother and sister had been born in Coon Rapids, and they picked up the family and moved to Blunt, South Dakota. They were born at home with midwives. In my respect, my mother was tired of having kids at home, I guess, so she went to stay with the relatives in the latter days of her pregnancy with me, and I was born in a hospital in Sioux City, Iowa. However, that's what my birth certificate says. However, I was really a South Dakotan by birth. The fact that that's where we lived. And we lived in Blunt, and then my brother, who was 7 years older than I, they were starting to think of their Judaism, and there were a few Jewish families in Yankton, South Dakota. So my dad moved the family to Yankton to be with other Jews, and decided that was better for our family to grow. But we didn't stay there but a couple of years, and it was about time for my brother to start with a Jewish education, and they moved to Sioux City to try that. You can notice we sort of followed the Missouri River downstream, and in Sioux City, my dad sort of learned the novelty business, or the carnival supply business, from my uncle who was in that business, Dave Roden, and thought, he wasn't sure what he was going to do, and we stayed there for a while. And there became a store in Omaha called Globe Novelty Company, which had gone bankrupt, and my dad heard about it, and he came down to look at Omaha. And he had looked elsewhere in the country. He'd gone to California because he had brothers and sisters there, and decided California wasn't his cup of tea. It was a little too fast for my dad. And he came to Omaha and looked at the Globe Novelty, or the remnants of Globe Novelty Company, and decided, well, here's a city that had at that time about 6 synagogues, and not a lot of big ones, but there was a Beth Israel and Temple Israel, there was Bethel synagogue was just forming, and was a conservative congregation. Seemed to fit their needs and the family's needs, and my brother could start Hebrew school, and my sister could go to Hebrew school and become more a part of a Jewish community, which Omaha has had for years and years, and is still viable today. The only problem with today is the kids grow up, they move away, they want to go to a bigger city where there are more job opportunities, I guess. Some of them stay here. But in the meantime, we moved to Omaha in 1936. I was just the latter stages of 4 years old, and we moved here in 36. I turned 5 at the end of that year in December, and I started school here in Omaha. And my dad bought the Globe Novelty Company and changed the name of it to XL Merchandise Novelty Company, and became a merchant catering to the needs of traveling carnivals, which extended itself greater and greater into other areas as it went along. As most carnival supply businesses have, they catered to the needs of organizations for fundraising, and in the decorations and party favors and all those type of things became part of XL Merchandise Novelty Company. In the meantime, I started school because we lived near 42nd and Dewey Street. Can't remember the exact address. It's all the area that's owned by the University of Nebraska Hospital these days, but we rented a house there, and I started school at Harrison, not at Harrison, a Columbian school, which is just off of Leavenworth and about 38th, 39th, somewhere in there. And I went there for a year to the kindergarten, and then my folks found a house at 54th and Western Avenue where they had an opportunity to buy it. In those days, the mortgage rates were pretty low, and they had enough to make a down payment at 5320 Western Avenue. And we had a school. Harrison School was about 2 blocks away, which in those years only went to the 5th grade. And I started Harrison School, which I went to until I graduated from the 5th grade, I guess you'd call it, and then matriculated to Dundee School, where I finished my grade school tenure, and then went on to Central High School. But I can remember walking from 54th or riding my bike from 54th and Western Avenue to Dundee School. And in those days, we joined Bethel Synagogue in 1936 or 37 when we moved here. And there was no Bethel Synagogue. There was a congregation, but the congregation met at the Jewish Community Center during the regular sessions of services and schooling. We used the Jewish Community Center. And for the high holidays, they used the American Legion Club, which was across the street from Central High School, about 21st and Dodge, approximately. And they had an auditorium there that they'd rent for the high holidays. And I can remember my consecration, my beginning of going to Hebrew school. I still have the book today. It's signed by Rabbi Goldstein. Was held at the Jewish Community Center. And then they started the building at 49th and Farnham, and we continued on with Bethel, and still belong to Bethel Synagogue today. So it's been a long run with one synagogue. And in high school at Central, I went to Central. I'd take the bus downtown. My dad used to go to work too early to get a ride with him. I didn't want to go to school that bad. So I'd take the streetcar or the bus downtown and go to Central, and then walk down to my folks' store at 1316 Farnham Street after school, and I would wait there and maybe study a little and ride home with my folks after they closed the store. In those days, we shopped at places like Safeway and Hinky Dinky's, which are two stores that are non-existent today. My dad used to open at 8, close at 5, 5 days a week. On Saturday, he'd close early, so Mom could go shopping. So instead of closing at 5, he'd close at 4 o'clock. I used to go down to the store on Saturday mornings after going to junior congregation. I'd take the streetcar downtown, and I would work at the store, or fool around, whatever you want to call it, as much as my dad could tolerate me. I would sweep the floors and all, and then he'd give me enough money. I'd go have some lunch and go to a movie. This was with 50 cents. I could have lunch for 15 cents, go to a movie for 15 cents, buy popcorn for a nickel, and I still had a nickel left. So that was my first attempt at making any money. I used to mow a few lawns when I got old enough, an old push mower in the neighborhood, make a dime here and a quarter there. But lived a regular outdoor life with the kids in the neighborhood. We were just about the only Jewish family in the neighborhood, but I didn't have a lot of trouble growing up with these kids. We became pretty good friends. Not many of them are left or even left in Omaha anymore. And of course I had a little anti-Semitism, but kids in those days, they only echoed what they knew from their parents or what they'd hear from their parents. They didn't know what real anti-Semitism was. It's too bad that parents have things to say that they really should have never said. Maybe it'd be a lot easier to get along in this world, and we'd find out that we're really not so different, that we've made those partitions that separate people today. But in the meantime, I went to Central High, and I graduated in 1948, and I remember the things like my bar mitzvah at Bethel. My brother, of course, was in World War II and was in the Army. And I remember Rabbi Goldstein reading a telegram that came from my brother from Italy. He was at the Anzio beachhead, but he was always a pretty good finagler. He was a company clerk. How he got a telegram out of Italy during the war, I know not, but I did have a telegram read to me from my brother, a telegram of congratulations that on my bar mitzvah, all the way from Anzio in Italy. And he served in the Army and returned home after the war. And my sister was going away to college. I was becoming, more cognizant of things growing up and more responsibilities. Although I didn't really get a lot of responsibility, and I went to college for 2.5 years and didn't realize what it was really all about until the Korean War came along. And at that point, I was 2.5 years into college, and I thought, well, I can take off some years, serve my country as best I can. But I thought I'd be sly and join the United States Coast Guard. I thought, that should be a pretty safe place to go. And not that I was afraid, but there were so many horror stories during the poor guy suffering in Korea, and I had empathy for him in the mud and the cold of Korea. I thought that, gee whiz, maybe I'd take a better route. So I went into the Coast Guard. However, I still hold the Korean battle ribbon. I found out the Coast Guard isn't only in the United States of America. We were all over the world. I served in the Korean theater, served out of Hawaii, and that's where I got a true education on what life is all about. Served in the Philippines, and it was a dramatic experience for my life. I am thankful of the time that I spent in the service. It was a time to grow up, and I came back with a more realistic look of what life is really all about after I got out of the service. I still look back, though, to when I was a small kid, and I still remember fondly the one grandfather that I did know, the one grandparent, Lewis Roden, who was a man who was well liked and had a curly head of hair till the day he died. It was salt and pepper, just thick and curly as it could be, and a big mustache, and a good sense of humor. Was a good man, but I didn't understand fully when he passed away where he had gone to. I just didn't really understand that much about the life and death thing that we all have to, face at some time in our life. So I missed him, and I couldn't quite explain to myself why he was gone. But that's, later on in life you realize that those are the things that happen. And I enjoyed him while he was here. He lived with us, and I enjoyed the trips to Sioux City when I was a youngster, because we often visited with the Roden side of the family. My Aunt Idell, my Uncle Dave, and my cousins Sid Roden and Helen Roden and Ducky Milder. Lois Lee was, but nobody called her Lois. It was always Ducky, because she was always in the water. They had a swimming pool in her backyard, and when she was 6, we were both 6 at the time. She taught me how to swim, but she was constantly in the water all the time, so they called her Ducky. But it was a good time, and I had an uncle, my wife's uncle, Roden, Yusha, lived in Council Bluffs, and I remember the days when we all sat around for Passover, this huge table, and there were 15, 20 people for a Seder, and they'd all be talking, but Uncle Yosha would be at the head of the table reading the whole Haggadah in Hebrew, which, of course, none of us kids really understood, but when it was time to eat, we understood. But it is those things that I can look back at and say, why wasn't I more proficient at reading Hebrew and more proficient at understanding? But I was a good outside the house, playing football, playing baseball, playing whatever games the kids played, running around, riding a bicycle. It was sort of a carefree childhood, and with both my parents working, we were just mischievous enough just to be mischievous, but never anything that went out of hand totally that would really get us into trouble. As far as in the service, that's where you learn really how to get along with people. Because when you're isolated on a ship of about 250 guys out in the middle of the Pacific Ocean or the South China Sea for periods of anywhere up to 32 days at a time without seeing land, you better learn how to get along with people. And that's what I've tried to do basically in life is get along. You don't have to take a back seat to who you are, but you don't have to offend people because you think that maybe you're a little better than, or there is no such thing as being better than anybody else. The thing in life is how you associate yourself with other people and try and put yourself in their place. I have several cousins with my dad's family of 14 children that unfortunately, I never really got to know them very well. Never got to know some of them at all because as the Jews dispersed from Israel in the early days to wherever it might have been in Europe, to England, to the United States, my dad's family dispersed from Wisconsin to New York, to Indiana, to California, to all different places. And in those days, nobody traveled like people travel today. And I just never really, but my mother and her sister in California, Aunt Sophie, were very close. And my mother would take me to California on the old Union Pacific Streamliner, whatever the name of it was, the city of Los Angeles. I don't know if that's the right name, but as a kid, she'd pack a suitcase for her and a suitcase for me. We'd get on the train and we'd ride in 3 days and we'd be in California and we'd be there for a week or 12 days. And then we'd get on a train and we'd ride back to Omaha, Nebraska. And that, so I saw some of the country that a lot of kids never got to see. People just didn't travel. Our biggest traveling was between Sioux City and Omaha. About every other week, we would either drive to Sioux City or the relatives in Sioux City would drive to Omaha. So there was a good camaraderie type of thing with our cousins in Sioux City. There was another, my Aunt Sophie married a gentleman by the name of Al Feinberg, and the Feinbergs lived in Sioux City also for some time until they decided to go to California. So that's why my mother would pick me up and take me to California. Also, one of my favorite uncles lived in California, my Uncle Bernard, who was a younger member of my dad's family. And I got to know him pretty well. Some of the others are, I don't know. Maybe it's because there was such a division in my father's family that I never got to know them real well. They were never very receptive to relatives, for whatever the reason may be. I'll never know. One of them is still alive today, Dale Wasserman, who became rather notable in the theater show business and is still writing today. I presume that's what I've heard anyway. But he was a loner, and even though he was cordial to my dad, he didn't feel the family ties. I feel very close to my sister. I felt very close to my brother. Unfortunately, he died when he was 40 years old. I was in love with my mother. My mother was a very, very wonderful lady. My dad was a little bit gruff at times, had a temper, and he couldn't yell at my mother, so he'd yell at the kids. Never yelled at my sister, though. She was, I'll say she was his favorite. I don't know if that's a truism or not, but he'd yell at the boys much easier than he would at my sister. And maybe deservedly so, because they're a little unpredictable at times in our actions. But we had a good life, and be it as it was, we always had clean clothes on. We were never pampered to the point of, although my dad in later days did, I guess he'd have to call it pampered a little bit, because I really almost passed out when I was in the Coast Guard. My first station was in Grand Haven, Michigan, and I came home on leave, and I used to have to take a bus all the way from Grand Haven through Chicago to Omaha. And my dad said one day I was here on leave, he said, "Why don't we buy you a car?" So he took me car shopping and bought a very slightly used Chevrolet two-door. It was regular front and back seats, but in those days they made two-door automobiles with no doors in back. And like I said, I almost passed out when he said that, and of course I received it with great enthusiasm, and I was able to drive back and forth. But when I got transferred overseas, I knew someday I would want another car, so I sold it in California. And my mother and I drove to California. I'll never forget that trip, because my mother wanted to stop in Las Vegas and play bingo. I always remember that because we parked adjacent to the old Golden Nugget in those days, which I think it's still about the same place, but the whole building, of course, had been revamped since then. But in the Nevada desert in the fall of the year, still pretty hot, and I wandered around the casino and marveled at all the goings-on there. But my mother wanted to play a little bingo, so she went to the bingo hall, which was upstairs over the Golden Nugget, part of it. And I wandered around, and she says, come in about 2 hours. I want to play bingo for 2 hours. So she played bingo, and I wandered around, and didn't really get the feeling of Las Vegas till much later in life. But I remember going to get her, and I says, okay, Mom, it's time to go. We still had to drive to Los Angeles, and I wanted to do it in the daylight. So she said, okay, so we left, and we went down to get in the car. Well, the car had been sitting on the street, parked in the sunshine, and being as it may, with no air conditioning, the car was so hot I couldn't touch it. So I had to go into the Golden Nugget, and I borrowed a towel from the bar. I said, get it a little wet, and I opened up the car, and I held the doors open, rolled down the windows for a little while till I could get in and touch the steering wheel. And then I took the towel back to the barkeep and thanked him for it. I had cooled off the wheel where I could hold it and drive, and we took off for Los Angeles with the windows open. It's the old 460 air conditioner, roll down 4 windows and go 60 miles an hour, because that, with no air conditioning in those days, that car was really hot. But my mother and I laughed about that, and we had a good trip. And I left her in Los Angeles to go back on a train. Sold the car and had her put the money in the bank, so when I came out of the service, I'd still have money to buy a car with when I came home. And I remember while I was there, it was just so the timing was perfect. My cousin Rosalie Feinberg, was her wedding weekend when I was there. So I got to go to her wedding, and then went and reported to the Coast Guard base in Alameda, California, and went to Honolulu, where I was reassigned to a ship, and was on one ship there for about a year, and then got transferred to another ship, and that's the ship that made the long extended trips to the Korean area. And although we were very close to Japan, we never stopped in Japan. Most of the time we stopped was in Hong Kong and in the Philippines for re-outfitting fuel and food and that type of thing. But we spent a lot of time on the water. And I think of my brother often, because he and I we were sort of business partners. My dad was getting older, and it was destined to be that I would be partners in Excel Merchandise. That seemed to be the way things were going. And unfortunately, he had a heart problem, but in those days, we didn't really know about heart problems the way they can find out things today. And he had a massive heart attack one day when he was 40 years old, and passed away. He left a wife and a daughter. And it was most unfortunate, because I was sort of at that time, I was the guy that lifted most of the boxes, and he was the guy that had most of the ideas. Pretty smart guy, even though we all have faults. He had a couple of problems that prevailed between he and my dad, but it was not bad. It was anything. It was not anything that couldn't be reconciled, and pretty basically was. But the thing was shocking when you go to lunch one day and you come back from lunch and the front door of the building is locked and the shade is pulled down. And I couldn't possibly imagine what had happened, and I come to find out that he had had a heart attack while talking to a supplier in California, ordering some merchandise, and it was almost instantaneous death. The guys they came with the rescue squad, but he was already passed away. So that was a big shock. I had to do a lot of soul searching to understand what in the world happened. The parents always figure they're going to pass on before the children, and here my dad was sort of touching somewhat on retirement, and my mom was still active in the business too, and all of a sudden they lost their oldest child. It was a time of reconciling things in my mind that was pretty difficult. I found an outlet eventually. Instead of a psychiatrist, I started bowling, but which was a major part of my life. After that, I got very interested in it, and I can't help but think of my sister too. She, of course, Roz, is still living. She's 4 years older than I. I won't mention her age. She'd probably get mad at me. But I'm 73. You figure it out. But she's a good sister. In fact, she's a great sister. And I've always, her husband Ike was always a guy with a good word and a helping hand, and another guy that knew where he came from, and was appreciative of everything that he did in his life, and was what he was able to accomplish in his life, and always wanted to share his good fortune with the rest of us. He was quite a guy, and today my sister is still that type of person. You couldn't ask for a better sister. She is a generous, wonderful lady who follows the tradition of her mother, who is a nice person, a well-spoken person, a fair person. I might have mentioned before, my mother would always say to my dad, who was a little gruff with some people, not to their face, but speaking of them, and my mother would always say, "Now, Max, if you can't say anything good about a person, just don't say anything at all." And that's the way, the philosophy of my mother's life, and that's the philosophy pretty much of my sister's life too. My sister has 3 children. Susie, who's still alive, and Alan, who's still alive and lives in California. Susie lives here in Omaha. And Janice, who unfortunately had 5 children, passed away from cancer, who was as sweet. As a youngster, she was a pain in the butt. But as she grew into adulthood, was the sweetest girl that you'd ever want to meet. Janice was just a wonderful young lady. Not that Susie and Alan aren't wonderful also, but Janice matured in a little bit different way than the other two. She was. I felt a great loss when Janice passed away. But she's got 5 children who are all their own people, and one of them's just going to get married here in Omaha come next Labor Day. However, I won't be able to partake in that because my oldest granddaughter is going to become a bat mitzvah on Labor Day. That's going to be in Lansdale, Pennsylvania, so I'm not going to be here. My sister can't come to the bat mitzvah, and I can't go to her grandson's wedding, so it's a draw, but we understand those things, and there's no problem there. I wish her well, and she wishes me well, but she is a very integral part of this community, and she's done a lot of good with whatever Ike has left her, and he told her to do good after he was gone, and she certainly has. In the meantime, when I got out of the service, I met a little girl by the name of Phyllis Potash, who came from a family and has been in Omaha for many, many years. And the coincidence is that my folks and her folks played in the same bridge club. I can't remember if it met once a month or met every other week or every week. It sort of I lost that in the remembrances, but they did play in the same bridge club with some other friends, and of course, so I knew the Potashes, and I knew Merle from high school. Phyllis just started high school when I got out of high school, but they were, all those people in that bridge club, of course, they were all at my bar mitzvah. They all of them, I think, belonged to Bethel Synagogue. And I can remember the lunches that they'd have after they were done playing bridge on a Sunday evening. It was like a picnic. The bagels, the cream cheese, the herring, all those things that from Jewish background that Jews nosh on, But it was I used to sit on the stairway going upstairs and listen to them. And we've all grown in my age group the same way. They'd sit at the dining room table and they'd talk about the aches and the pains and the arthritis and the this, that, and the other thing. And it makes you laugh because now I'm at the age group, and doing the same things that they did as they went through the growth to the senior citizenship. But I met Phyllis, and I saw her walking down the street one day, and I was driving home. I had gotten my car after I got out of the service, and I asked her if I could give her a lift home, and it wasn't all that far. I think she'd been to Chris's Rexall at 50th and Dodge, and they lived at 52nd and Farnham Street, but I gave her a ride home. And Merle, in the meantime, got out of the service. He was in the Navy after I got out, and I went over to see Merle. So in those days, Irvington was a place to go. He was going with Ruth Slavin, Ruthie, who is now, of course, Ruth Potash. And I says, you guys want to go out to Irvington and get some ice cream? Big deal. And yeah, so as unknowns to me, well, why don't you go along with them, Phyllis, Mrs. Potash said. And, okay, that's fine, So I got to know Phyllis better, and we started to date, and one thing led to another, and I asked her to marry me, and she considered it for about 5 seconds. No, I'm just kidding. I'd say we decided to get hitched, and it's been a good life ever since. Of course, like any couple, if you haven't had a few pitfalls in the road, can't always agree on everything, but we agree on most things, with the important things. And we got married, and bought a house. I had enough money, or my dad gave me enough money, I should say, but that was my interest in the business, I suppose, to make a down payment on a brand new house. It was 1,100 square feet. House at 3101 North 67th Avenue in Benson. And it was a nice little house on a corner, and made a good starter house for us. It was right near Benson West School off of Blondo and or Maple Street, I'm sorry. And we lived there. We had our first child there was Helene. And then when Michael came along, we finally realized how small those bedrooms were. It was a 3-bedroom house. And we decided to look for a bigger house. And we found one. It was a 3-bedroom house at 6958 Cummings Street. And we decided that was a house for us, so we bought that house. And then as our family grew, instead of moving someplace else, we put an addition to the house. So we then had 5 bedrooms. It was a big house. It would still be a pretty good sized house, so it was over 3,000 square feet. And we had eventually a bedroom for us and one for each of the kids, which was good. They gave them the opportunity to all be themselves. I liked the idea. They all had their own things. They were all a mess, but you ever see a youngster's room that doesn't have stuff, especially a girl's room, doesn't have stuff laying in it. That's why we gave Helene the last room in the house. It was way back, Nobody ever go back there to see what was laying around the floor. But the boys were the same way. But they were good kids, and they are good kids. And they grew up at on Cummings Street until they were all gone. They'd all moved out for one reason or another. Moved out of town, got married, whatever the case might be. And we finally realized how 2 people would rattle around in a house that was that big with 5 bedrooms, and we only need one of them. So finally, we moved out and bought this house where we live today, and North 155th Street, 734 North 155th. And Phyllis didn't want a 2-story house anymore. Actually, our house on Cummings Street had 1 flight of stairs from the top floor down to the main floor, another flight of stairs from the main floor down to the family room, and another flight of stairs down from the family room to the basement. And she really wanted to eliminate the stairs, so we bought this house here on Pepperwood, and lived here since then. And we now have all 3 of the boys are married, have families. Andy lives in Yulee, Nebraska, has a stepdaughter and 2 children, a boy and a girl. Yulee's about 50 miles from Omaha, north of Fremont. Steve lives in the St. Louis area and has 2 boys, is a practicing attorney. By the way, Andy is in the embroidery business, has a place in Fremont, Nebraska. And Steve is, like I said, is an attorney and has 2 sons. And Michael has 3 daughters and lives in Lansdale, Pennsylvania. And I think I mentioned somewhere along the line, the oldest one is just turning 13. Will be a bat mitzvah come Labor Day. And Helene is still a bachelorette living in Evanston, Illinois, and is a speech pathologist, and got her. She liked Evanston because she went to Northwestern to get her advanced degree, get her master's in speech pathology. and she and her dog often come to visit at least a couple times a year. So it's just like having we refer to him as our grandpuppy, frisky little rascal, but he likes his grandma and grandpa and likes to come and visit us. And we see the other children. We go to Pennsylvania, whenever we can. And Steve comes to from St. Louis. I can't drive as much as I used to. I used to like to drive to St. Louis, but after about an hour and a half on the road, my knees get so stiff. It's pretty hard. But we've seen him a couple times a year at least. And Andy, I go to work and help him in his business. I don't know exactly how much help I am, but I go and have a relationship at least a couple days a week. He and his wife are operating this business in downtown Fremont. And other than that, we just still partake in services at Bethel Synagogue, not as much as I used to because I sang in a choir there for over 50 years. And I still sing today if I could, but my age has robbed me of the wind that I suppose you can say, the force that I need to sing with. And I just sort of retired from that. I was a bowler for. Everybody should participate in some kind of athletics. If you want to call bowling an athletic endeavor, I was involved in bowling for close to 40 years, and still have a great love for the game. But with arthritis and one thing and another, knees, and I can't do it anymore. But I still, it was very near and dear to me. I made a lot of friends in the bowling community, and just attended the Bowling Hall of Fame banquet the other Saturday night, and was glad to see they installed in the Hall of Fame, although posthumously, Rose and Leo Whites, who were longtime residents of Omaha, used to be in the grocery business till they got into the bowling business. Were very prominent in the bowling business here in Omaha, and I still see their son Arnie, who's a stockbroker here in town. A lot of memories from the good Jewish community here in Omaha. I think that the Jewish community here in Omaha could be wrong. It seems to me to be growing instead of the years that it sort of lost head count because the younger kids moving out of town with the growth industries, computers, one thing and another. The banking industry has attracted some younger Jewish couples here to Omaha, and I see a lot more kids at Bethel Synagogue than I used to, or at least I remember. And Omaha is a good place to grow up. Yes, Omaha has its problems, like any city has its problems. Even the problems in the small towns like Fremont or in Clarinda, Iowa, wherever today with today's society, sometimes a lot of lack of respect by young people that we used to have, at least I hope we had, for the older generation. But it's probably is magnified by television today, more so than anything else. The papers mostly used to use good taste in the way they reported the news, but with television cameras today, I'm afraid that they looking for sensationalism, going a little overboard on how they handle reporting the news. They make it seem a lot worse than it really is, although, yes, there are bad things out there, but there have always been bad things out there. I think most people are good at heart and want to be responsible citizens. And if there's anything I could could tell my children or my grandchildren is be responsible to what is right and what is wrong, and don't be critical of people just because they have a different opinion than you do. Everybody's entitled to an opinion, and as long as it is a matter of contention as to who's right and who's wrong, or which way to turn the corner, whether it's a sharp left or a gentle left, or a sharp right or a gentle right, or a middle of the road. The old Indian saying was, never judge a man till you've walked a mile in his moccasins. And it's the easiest thing in life, is be considerate of others, and they'll be considerate of you. Be understanding, and hope that they're understanding. As I reflect on my Judaism, this is ancient history that we're dealing with. We presume there's a God. Sometimes we wonder, there's so many bad things that happen. I look at the Holocaust and I think, how could if there's a God, could there be such a terrible thing happen to not only the Jews, but several Christians were killed in the Holocaust also. How could there be such a thing? But then, on the other hand, is God testing us? Did he permit this to happen? And bad things have happened for every time, ever since the time started that we know of. Are we continually under test? Is it made? Is it done to make us think that there are better things? Is it made to test us to be better people? We hope so. Nobody's got the real answer or the right answer, although a lot of people claim to have all the answers, but it just doesn't happen that way as I see it. I think that if we stay true to ourselves, stay true to our families, and true to our religion, that you can survive in this world and be a respected member of the community, and the entire community, not just your religious community. Try and help people. Try and be the best person you can, and and disregard what the naysayers do and what they say. To my grandchildren, my children, to my wife, I love you and I respect you, and although I've had my bad days and my good days, try and remember the good days, because nobody's perfect, and I certainly know I wasn't, but there's a lot of love in my heart for you, all of you.